In 1967, when Harlem was a battleground of crime, politics, and racial unrest, a corrupt cop named Ray "Dirty" Winters made a decision that would seal his fate. He thought his badge made him untouchable. He thought his connections in the city's underworld gave him power, and that his deal with the enemy would elevate him beyond the reach of Bumpy Johnson. But he was wrong. Winters didn't realize the price of betrayal. Ray Winters, a man accustomed to bending the law, had just crossed the line by selling out Bumpy Johnson for a quick $50K. He thought he could pocket the cash and keep his job, his power, his reputation. But what he didn't understand was that in Harlem, where respect was the only currency that mattered, betrayal was unforgivable. It was a hot summer night when the phone call came through to Bumpy. The betrayal had been completed. Winter had sold out his old ally for a stack of cash. Bumpy didn't flinch. He wasn't a man of impulse. His response was calm, almost calculated. In 72 hours, Ray Winters would never be seen again. Ray Winters was everything you'd expect from a corrupt cop, charismatic, arrogant, and always looking for the next opportunity to line his pockets. He'd spent years on the force, working his way up with connections to local gangs, rackets, and the wealthy elite. To the outside world, he was a model officer, his uniform pristine, his demeanor stoic. But behind closed doors, he was a man who had made countless deals with the devil, pulling strings and trading favors with criminals to make his life easier. Winters didn't just manipulate the law, he bent it to his will. He was the cop who could turn a blind eye, look the other way when the right amount of cash exchanged hands, and silence witnesses when they got too loud. He thought his connections, his power, and his ability to strike deals made him untouchable. But Winters underestimated the power of respect. He had never been respected. He was feared. Yes, but respect wasn't something you could buy. And when he made the fatal mistake of trying to sell out Bumpy Johnson, he quickly learned the hard way. He thought Bumpy, a man whose legend ran deep through the streets of Harlem, would fold under the weight of betrayal. He couldn't have been more wrong. In his eyes, the people of Harlem were pawns. To Winters, they were just a means to an end. He didn't care for them. And he certainly didn't care for the way Bumpy had created an empire that ran on loyalty and respect. Winters thought it was all a game. But this game had stakes much higher than he could ever have anticipated. Winters had made his move for the money, but in doing so, he threatened something far greater than just Bumpy's personal power. He threatened the fragile balance that held Harlem together. Harlem wasn't just a place, it was a way of life. The streets thrived on loyalty, respect, and codes that had been forged over years of struggle. Winters, however, saw only dollars. His actions weren't just a betrayal to Bumpy, they were a betrayal to every single person who had lived by the code. For Bumpy, this was a personal attack. The streets of Harlem had been his to protect, and anyone who tried to disrupt the peace he had carefully crafted would be dealt with harshly. Winters' greed threatened to destabilize everything, and Bumpy wasn't about to let that happen. The moral line had been crossed when Winters took the money. It wasn't just a case of a cop taking a bribe. It was about the breaking of an unspoken rule, betrayal of one's own. In Bumpy's world, respect was sacred, and Winters' actions had struck at the very heart of that code. In 72 hours, Winters would learn that in Harlem, betrayal never goes unpunished. Bumpy would deliver justice, swift and unyielding, showing that no one, not even a cop, was beyond the reach of Harlem's king. It all started when Winters thought he had the upper hand. He was sitting in his car, counting the money, feeling the rush of power that came with having pulled off such a big deal. The payoff from the enemies of Harlem had been substantial, $50,000. It was more than Winters had ever imagined he could get, but what he didn't realize was that his betrayal had been noticed long before the money changed hands. Bumpy Johnson's people were everywhere, keeping their eyes on the street. One of them saw Winters meeting with the rival gang's representatives, and just like that, the word got to Bumpy. By the time Winters finished counting the money, Bumpy already knew about the betrayal. The man who had sold him out for cash had sealed his fate without even knowing it. Winters thought he was untouchable. His confidence in the deal was so high that he didn't even take precautions. He thought he had outsmarted everyone, especially Bumpy. But Bumpy Johnson had his own way of doing things. He wasn't a man who rushed. He wasn't a man driven by anger. No, Bumpy was a man of precision, and he was about to show Winters exactly what happens when you underestimate him. Bumpy sat in his favorite chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest as the news reached him. It wasn't a shout of anger, but a steady, measured silence that filled the room. He already knew what had happened. He'd been expecting it. He knew the signs, the cracks in the system. And now, Ray Winters had crossed the line. "I'm going to tell you something once," Bumpy said quietly, his voice low but carrying the weight of years of experience. "When you cross me, there's no turning back. You pay the price, and it's not just with money. It's with your life." The silence in the room grew as Bumpy's men looked on, understanding the calm before the storm. Bumpy was already working, planning Winters' demise with the cold precision he was known for. There was no rush. Bumpy didn't need to make a move just yet. Winters had 72 hours and he didn't even know it. Bumpy had a reputation, and it wasn't just because of his power. It was because he was a man who knew how to handle betrayal. No one ever questioned him twice. Winters, meanwhile, felt untouchable. He moved through the streets like a man who had finally won the game. No one had dared challenge him, and now he felt like he was on top of the world. His deal had been made, the money was in hand, and the people who had tried to cross him were now at his mercy. The thought that Bumpy would retaliate never crossed his mind. He was too busy thinking about his next move, how to solidify his new position. But while Winters enjoyed his false sense of security, Bumpy was already preparing. His men were quietly watching, gathering information, and making sure the trap was set perfectly. Bumpy didn't need to rush. He knew exactly what would happen in 72 hours. The days dragged on for Winters, filled with false confidence. He spent his time flaunting his power, making new deals, and assuming that his betrayal had gone unnoticed. He didn't see the danger creeping closer, nor did he sense the weight of Bumpy's calm, calculated approach. Bumpy was in no rush. He had his entire network working in the background, ensuring everything was in place. No detail was too small. His men quietly infiltrated Winters' usual haunts, places where he thought he was safe, where the money he had made was laundered. Bumpy knew that Winters' arrogance would be his downfall. The more he thought he was in control, the more the trap tightened. The city continued its hum, unaware that the balance was about to shift once more. Winters still hadn't realized that Bumpy had set a plan in motion so precise that no escape was possible. It wasn't about violence. It was about sending a message. The trap was a surgical strike, one that would make Winters' disappearance seem like an accident, something that the world wouldn't bat an eye at until it was too late. Bumpy knew exactly where Winters would be on the evening of the 72nd hour. He knew the route he would take home, the places he frequented, and who he trusted. Bumpy's strategy was simple. Let Winters think he had won, then snatch away his freedom in the most devastating way possible. It was exactly 72 hours after the betrayal when Ray Winters left his favorite speakeasy, a grin on his face as he walked toward his car. He had made it. No one suspected a thing. He had taken the money, made the deals, and was now enjoying his victory. His uniform didn't even seem to weigh on him anymore. He was beyond it. To him, he was already more than just a cop. He was a man who had broken the system and come out on top. But what he didn't see was the shadow creeping up behind him, the cold figure in the alley just ahead, the eyes that had been watching his every move. Bumpy Johnson's presence was like a storm on the horizon. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't loud, but when it came with overwhelming force. Winters' last thoughts were filled with disbelief as he turned to face Bumpy. There was no warning, no shout, just a face that was calm, implacable. Bumpy's. "You thought you could cross me for money, Winters?" Bumpy's voice was steady, almost kind. "That's a mistake only a man who doesn't understand respect makes." The silence between them stretched. Winters opened his mouth to say something, but the words never came. The cold realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't untouchable. Not anymore. In that moment, everything that Winters had built came crashing down. His empire of lies, his sense of superiority, all of it vanished. He was now facing the consequences, and it was too late to back out. What followed was swift. Bumpy moved with precision, his actions measured and deliberate. It was over in 30 seconds. Winters would never see another day, his life snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Bumpy didn't hesitate. He didn't need to. Winters had sealed his own fate when he took the money. The betrayal was the last step of a long journey, one that would ultimately lead to Winters's disappearance. In the span of just half a minute, Bumpy had delivered his justice. Winters's life was taken with the same cold efficiency that Bumpy had lived his own. Justice was served not with rage, but with the certainty that no one, not even a cop, was beyond the reach of the man who commanded respect in Harlem. Winter's body was quietly disposed of, the disappearance so clean, so seamless, that no one even raised an eyebrow. The streets, as always, would continue their slow hum. But Bumpy had once again made a point. He had proven that loyalty was not just a virtue, it was the foundation of everything. Betrayal, no matter the form, would always come with a cost. The moral lesson was clear to those who had been watching from the sidelines. Respect is not something to be taken lightly. Once you cross that line, there's no going back. The news of Ray Winters's disappearance barely caused a ripple in Harlem. A corrupt cop gone without a trace, it was just another story in a city filled with such stories. Winters's death, however, would leave a lasting impact, not because of the circumstances, but because of the lesson it taught. The community would remember what happened, and they would remember the message Bumpy had sent. For the people of Harlem, Bumpy's justice was not just about vengeance, it was about restoring balance. The streets weren't ruled by fear, they were ruled by respect. Bumpy had made sure that no one ever forgot that. As for Winters, his name would disappear from the history books as if it had never been there. His body was buried in the shadows, and his betrayal would be forgotten by all but those who knew the true price of dishonor. Bumpy Johnson, however, became a legend all over again. His name would be spoken with reverence, not just because of his power, but because of his unyielding commitment to the rules of respect and loyalty. Harlem was his, and anyone who forgot that would suffer the same fate. If this story hit you, smash that subscribe button. We're telling the Bumpy Johnson stories that history forgot, the moments that made him a legend, the code that made him untouchable. Drop a like if you think Bumpy was the smartest man in Harlem. And in the comments, tell me, what would you have done if you were Ray Winters? Could you have stayed loyal, or would you have made the same mistake? More legendary stories coming next. Don't miss it.